With Ryan Shumpert, Brent Hubbs, VolQuest.com, the Tennessee baseball team is heading to Omaha, Nebraska in the College World Series. And Ryan, we were talking about it for a team that's been full of drama all year long. This one today, no drama as Tennessee beats LSU by a score of 15-6, and it was all about the long ball today.
It was, I wrote about it last night that Tennessee didn't get a whole lot of power, and that was kind of the same thing in the Liberty game that closed out the regional. But there was a hitter's ballpark today, didn't have the heavier air with the rain, and it showed. I mean, it showed on both sides. LSU hit 4 home runs as well, but Tennessee hit 6. Jake Rucker set the tone early, hit 2 in his first 2 at-bats to give Tennessee their first 3 runs. LSU ace Landon Marceau kind of ran out of gas after being taxed pretty heavily the last few weeks. LSU took him out of the game after 3 innings, and from there Tennessee just jumped on a pretty mediocre LSU bullpen. The huge 6th inning kind of exploded it. LSU made it a little bit interesting, cut it to 5 at one point, but even from then Tennessee had 2 big responses in the 8th and 9th inning to get more runs and make it about as easy as they could.
It's interesting. There's so many variables to this team. There's so many different things we've talked about all year long. And the thing I kept coming back to with the way the game was on Saturday night and then the way the game played out today is no matter the circumstance, this team just seems to be able to deliver. If it needs to be a high-scoring game, fine, play a high-scoring game. If it's a low-scoring pitching duel, okay, let's play a low-scoring pitching duel. In Tennessee has seemingly found ways to answer regardless of the style of play. What do you credit that most to?
That's a hard question. And I mean, to your point, it's been like that the whole entire season. You go back to the opening weekend at Georgia Southern, and they won low-scoring games. They won come from behind, high-scoring games and extra innings. But I mean, more than anything, I think it just the balanced offense. Tennessee has 7 guys that can hit the home run pretty consistently, but 3 or 4 of those guys, that's not what they do best, isn't hit the home run. Jake Rucker, for a 3 hitter in the SEC, he's not a huge power guy, but he gets on base at an incredible clip and is a really good player. And I think you see that a lot of guys. Pete Durkee is the same way. Max Ferguson's the same way. So you have the guys that can get the job done in the power and the slugging department, but they're not relying on that. They have a lot of depth, a lot of options, and I think that showed. And then the other thing is just the pitching as a whole. I mean, I can't say enough about what Frank Anderson's done and just how incredible he's been. Tennessee doesn't have the big names that a lot of teams have. They may not have the best bullpen guy in the country, the best starter in the SEC. But I'll tell you what, Tennessee has 6 really good pitchers with their starters, and then Sean Hundley, Camden Sewell, and Redmond Walsh. And when you have 6 really good pitchers who can throw the ball for multiple innings at a time, and throw strikes and don't have any issues with command at any point during the season, you're going to have a lot of success. And I think that shows up. And the consistency of this team, I think, maybe more than anything, is due to that pitching.
Yeah, it's crazy how the pitching, we talked about it early in the year. Who was going to be the Saturday guy? Could they could they really find that third guy? Could Tidwell emerge? What was going to happen there? All of that is kind of played out the way that Tony Vitello had hoped at best case scenario, if you will. Coach Vitello made an interesting comment in his post-game Zoom, I thought, when he talked about how the fact that they swept through the regional and they swept the super regional and the benefit of that moving forward to Omaha because it hasn't taxed anybody. You look at LSU's arms today, they were tired. Their best pitcher was tired early in this game. How beneficial is it for Tennessee to not get stretched and play 6 games in a region and then play a 3-game regional set before you go to Omaha?
I think it's pretty big. I think only time will tell, and it's even hard to say just how big because who knows when it's too much. They've been taxed too much and they can't pitch effectively. Look, we watched Kevin Kopps throw nearly 150 pitches every single weekend this year, and he's still been really good, and he's starting today for Arkansas. But you look at that, teams that had to lean on their pitching heavily, that's at some point you think that's going to pay dividends. That's going to hurt them. And that just goes into Tennessee's aspect. That just goes into what I was just saying, the depth of that. All regular season, Tennessee didn't have to do that. They didn't have to overtax their arms. Now, there wasn't a ton of great depth in that bullpen, but the starting pitching was so solid that they didn't have to use the bullpen a whole lot most weekends, and they never taxed Sean Hundley extensive amounts, a ton. They never did that with Camden Sewell. They never did that with Redmond Walsh. So you saw it a little bit last week in the regional with Sean Hundley, but he's really the only pitcher you can say all year Tennessee's pushed their arm at all. So I think you get to Omaha, and you're going to have a chance to, in another 4-team double elimination tournament, when pitching depth shows up and matters. I think you're going to see Tennessee be able to push those guys, the Redmond Walsh, Camden Sewell, even the starters, Blade Tidwell, Chad Dallas. I think you're going to be able to see them push them to their absolute max and probably get more effective deep into games than a lot of other teams.
All right, so here's another interesting thing that jumps out to me that I want to ask you about, because you've covered this team, you've covered this program for a while. You know that they don't win the opening game of the SEC tournament. They don't play particularly well. The opening game of regional play, they need heroics in the bottom of the ninth to win against a really good Wright State team. But then this weekend, you never felt like they were really in trouble last Saturday night, even though they didn't have the lead. Once they got the lead, you felt like they were going to win that game. And today they were dominant. Is this team getting more comfortable as we go along here and the pressure seems to mount? Because it did not seem like the moment was too big for this team at all at any point this weekend.
No, it wasn't. And heck, I'd say that's the case it's been all year. The moment's never been too big for these guys. Now, I think the SEC tournament was really beneficial because you got to play, what was it, 5-6 postseason games before playing the NCAA tournament. I think that was beneficial for some of the players that hadn't played in the postseason before, the sophomores on this team, and even the players who had. It wasn't like Tennessee had just made the NCAA and SEC tournament once with the guys that had been on this team, and it was one game in Hoover and a long trip in Chapel Hill that season. But I think that kind of helped get some of that postseason nerves out of the way. But from there, I mean, this Tennessee team, the atmosphere at the moment hasn't been too big for them all year. I think when they kind of got the taste of, okay, this is what postseason baseball is about, it's just the same game. I think there was no doubt Tennessee was going to be fine and the moment wasn't going to be too big. And that'll be something interesting to watch. Omaha is another new scene. Guys going to be walking around. They've never been in that ballpark. It's a big spectacle that's going to be going on next week. But even with the Tennessee team that hasn't been there, it's hard to not feel pretty confident that the scene, the environment won't be too big for them.
Omaha has a chance to be the SEC Invitational, depending on how things play out here, which will be a storyline, obviously, for a lot of people to discuss. You mentioned you think Tennessee can handle that moment. What do you like about Tennessee's chances as they move forward and into Omaha? What do you like about them being able to make a run at this thing?
I like that Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Arkansas hasn't gotten there yet. Vanderbilt has. I like that they're on the other side of the bracket. I think those two to go along with Tennessee are the three best teams in the country. Maybe I'm maybe disrespecting Texas a little bit. They obviously have a really good team too. But the way the bracket unfolds, you mentioned it being really SEC heavy. Now, most of that SEC is going to be on the other side. Now, Mississippi State could be on Tennessee's side, but I think the bracket sets up well for Tennessee. You look at their first game, they're going to get the winner of DBU and Virginia. Obviously, Virginia is a program that's been there. Dallas Baptist has not been there. Neither of those teams are nearly as good as Tennessee and will probably be one of the worst 2 or 3 teams in Omaha next week. So I think the bracket plays out really well. And then if you get to the championship game, we've said that a 3-game series plays well to this team's advantages. So I like the way it sets up for them, and it's hard not to feel good about this team. And one other thing I will add, this park's played so small the last 2 weeks, and you saw Blade Tidwell today, even though I thought he pitched pretty well. He gave up 4 home runs. That's kind of the one weakness of this Tennessee pitching staff, Chad Dallas especially. They'll give up some home runs. It's a big park to the Ameritrade in Omaha. I think that plays to Tennessee's advantage too. You have pitchers that throw strikes, they get outs, they can give up some home runs. And then on the reverse side, to what we were talking about at the beginning, this Tennessee offense can hit the home run, but they're not relying on it. They can win other ways. So I think the park dimensions and the way the bracket looks like it's going to unfold works well for Tennessee.
Going to be fascinating to watch. Obviously, winning that first one, trying to stay in the winner's bracket as long as you can is huge for any type of postseason run in Omaha. But the bottom line is this team has delivered all season long. They delivered in a big-time way this weekend, including a no-doubter today, 15-6 over the LSU Bengal Tigers as Tennessee heads to Omaha, Nebraska in the College World Series. He's Ryan Shumpert. I'm Brent Hubbs, VolQuest.com.